Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Now before we start, don't forget to check out the KCC Discord. I'm in there all the time, it's free, come on over and say hi. Our first story today comes to us from Bata. You want me to check if your new BS policies are legal? Sure, let's jump right in. About 10 years ago, I had my first real job working in a fast food chain for minimum wage. It was a crappy job, but it was only to fill a gap between me dropping out of sixth form in February and starting my college course in September. After being there several months, the regional manager came over to visit and said about there being a few incidents regarding money missing from the tills that were never resolved. We're not exactly talking about the heist of the century here. It would be a few pence or at most £5 out, and this had only happened on a handful of occasions. Most were resolved to being mistaken orders on the tills or card receipts dropping behind the tills. Because of this, there was a new policy that they implemented where the staff members would each be personally responsible for their tills, meaning they required everyone to come in 15 minutes before their shift and stay 15 minutes after their shift to count the money in the tills. All of this time was unpaid. We were also told if the tills were short, we had to pay it back out of our own pockets on the same day, no exceptions. Of course, if the tills were up, they'd just call that a win for them and pocket the extra cash. The staff always lose. Naturally, everybody was pissed about this except for one brown nose who said it was great that people have to take responsibility for their mistakes. I guess unpaid overtime will teach us a lesson, right? I'm usually very quiet and introverted, but I will absolutely speak out from something I truly believe in or protest against something I don't. I was first to speak out against these new policies and question their legalities, to which the area manager responded with something along the lines of, "Feel free to check their legality. I assure you that we aren't breaking any laws." So I did exactly that. Later that night, I went home and checked our laws, and unsurprisingly, everything they were enforcing was illegal here. The area manager is based in Ireland, which more than likely has different employment laws, but his ignorance to our different laws and situation was painfully obvious. I called up the equivalent of a union. They don't exist here either, and they confirmed that it was illegal and advised me not to adhere to the policies. Next shift comes around and I roll in at 11 a.m., my start time, and immediately the other staff start kicking off. I went upstairs, counted my float in the 15 minutes they expected it to take, and then actually started working at 11:15. I explained myself to the rest of the staff and showed them evidence, and they all decided to follow suit. Everybody except for Brown Nose. She insisted that we all needed to do our part for the company that pays us minimum wage, don't forget, and that we should be grateful for the jobs, still minimum wage. None of us took that on board and left her to carry on working for free if that's her choice. I think she was expecting something from the boss for her dedication. The local manager was also on our side, but he did have to tell the regional manager what was happening. On the regional manager's next visit, about a month later, he started having meetings with the staff to investigate what this was all about and why we weren't sticking to the policy, and they all pointed towards me, telling them not to. When he got round to the meeting with me, he was pissed and started kicking off at me, asking why I was so determined to overrule him, to which I replied, "You told me to check the legalities of the policies, so I did," and showed him the evidence in the form of our local employment laws on my phone. Defeated, he left and decided to withdraw all the policies, including the one where we had to waste time counting the floats and pay back any shortages. The rest of the staff there liked me for it, except from Brown Nose, but nobody liked her anyway. One thing to note in the working world is if you're not on a salary and you're an hourly worker, if you're being required to do any work on unpaid time, it's likely illegal, and that goes for a lot of countries. Check into your local labor laws, you might be surprised. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Bree-Wan Kenobi. Don't want this saleswoman? Let me find another for you. Let's jump right in. While I was putting myself through university, this was the mid-2000s, I was working at a bicycle shop. I can honestly say it's the best place I have ever worked. The owners treated their staff very well, and so this shop retained loyal, highly capable employees that made loads of high-end sales. But what was somewhat unusual for a male-dominated industry in the mid-2000s was that there was an equal number of male and female employees, and these women were definitely the most qualified people for the job. One was an engineer for a bike company, one was a highly successful triathlete, an XC racer, and even one of the owners was a woman. Almost having an unrelated university degree meant that I was by far the least impressive woman working at this place. I just liked bikes. One day, a man, maybe 50 to 60-ish, came into the shop. I was first on the scene. He said he was looking to buy a bike, and so I started going through the usual probing questions to determine what kind of bike he was looking for. Simple questions like, did he ride on the road or trails? Even the most incapable salesperson could use the answers to these questions to point this guy in the right direction. But he seemed highly resistant to talking to me or answering my questions. He finally said, "Is there someone else I could talk to?" Maybe he just didn't like my sales approach, or maybe I seemed too young to be knowledgeable. But since he didn't give me a chance to prove myself and seemed to be staring longingly at my busy male colleagues, I had a hunch that he didn't think a woman was capable of selling him a bike. So I smiled and said, "Of course." Lucky for me, there weren't any idle male employees in sight, so I grabbed one of the other women that I work with, quietly letting her know my suspicions about this guy. Before I was even out of earshot, I hear this man agitatedly say, "I need someone else." Suspicions confirmed. So we purposely seek out yet another extremely capable female employee to help this man. When he sees her approach, he shouts, "Just let me speak to your manager." So in struts the owner, who is very eager to join our malicious compliance stunt with a beaming smile on her face. "I'm the owner. What can I do to help you today, sir?" The utter defeat on his face is something I will never forget. There is a particular response to this situation that could be used if someone says to you that they didn't know that girls could be into bikes too. All you have to say is, "Yeah, and my balls never get caught in the chain either." Our next story today comes to us from Yellow Spaces. You want the salted licorice? Sure thing. Let's jump right in. I used to work in a candy store back in high school. Pretty awesome job, not gonna lie. We had a pretty huge selection of candies to choose from, including a pay-per-pound candy case that took up most of the store. We sold a decent amount of licorice in different flavors, including salted licorice. If you're unfamiliar, it's just black licorice that's been dusted with ammonium chloride, an extremely salty and bitter chemical. We had a few different versions of it, but one stood out for how darn salty it was. Seawater is less salty than that licorice. Pure salt is somehow less salty than that licorice. We would always have new employees eat a piece of it as initiation and share a few laughs at their facial expressions after the first bite. One day, an older man comes in and rudely asks where our salted licorice is. I guide him over to the licorice section and show him the choices we have. He immediately goes for the saltier than salt licorice coins. I try my best to dissuade him, explaining that this licorice is extremely salty, but he quickly turns on me. "Young OP, I've been eating salted licorice my entire life. Just shut the hell up and weigh me out a pound so I can get the hell out of your damn store." Cue the malicious compliance. I gladly weigh him up a pound of the salt coins and take him over to the register. I ring up his devil candy, hand him a receipt, and take a step back. Old man starts walking to the door, but luckily takes a piece and pops it in his mouth before leaving. "Oh my effing god, what in the hell is this?" he screams after a few chews. The store is now dead silent. He storms back up to the register and starts screaming at me. "This is the absolute worst licorice I've had in my life. How dare you let me buy this? Get your effing manager right now. You deserve to be fired for selling me this." Before I can even say a word, my manager quickly comes up to me and motions me aside. "Sir, I was listening to your transaction and OP made multiple attempts to talk you out of your selection. Normally, I'd be more than happy to issue you a refund, but considering your language and treatment of my employees, I'm gonna need you to get the hell out and never come back." Old man was so taken aback that he stormed out with his tail between his legs and we never saw him again. Turns out, the only thing saltier than the licorice was his attitude. I completely don't understand the appeal of salted licorice. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's flavored with ammonium chloride, not sodium chloride. And yes, it tastes like salty ammonia. What are your thoughts on salted licorice? I'd love to hear them. Comment down below. Our next story today comes to us from NSN242. Follow the flag code to the letter or you'll be fired. Let's jump right in. This happened about 10 years ago. I was struggling to figure out where my life was headed, what I wanted to do for a career, typical existential crisis stuff. I quit my job in the auto industry to feel out a few other career paths. I landed on security guard for an industrial complex in Middle Georgia. Big company in a small town. Pay was great. It was night shift, so it worked well with my non-existent sleep schedule, and it was an interesting change from what I've done most of my life. I loved it at first, until my boss changed his shift to overlap with mine in the morning. The dude was nuts. He had delusions of grandeur, and he was a pathological liar. Frequently made up stories about being in the Navy SEALs with Steven Seagal. He was a quartermaster in the Navy for 4 years before he filed a disability claim after he knocked over a storage rack and it fell on him. One of his biggest pet peeves was the massive flag the company had. He printed out a few dozen copies of the flag code and told us to follow it to the letter, including putting it up and down every morning and night. Being night shift, I was almost always the person putting it up. One morning, there was extremely bad weather and, per the flag code, I didn't put the flag up. My boss came in about an hour later and ran his first rounds and noticed the flag wasn't displayed. I pointed at that specific section of the flag code that says not to display it during inclement weather, and he absolutely lost his mind, berated me for 30 minutes. When it was time to clock out, he was still berating me, but I just stood up, clocked out, and left our little shack. The next day, I show up, and he tells me I'm suspended. Cool, I get a free night off. I come back 2 days later, and the district manager is there with my boss. We sit down and chat. My boss keeps interrupting me and insulting me, so I told the district manager that I'm leaving if my boss doesn't let me speak. The DM takes me elsewhere to finish the convo. I explained everything that happened, showing him the flag code, showed him the weather that morning, and then told him about my boss threatening to fire me if I didn't follow the flag code, and then berating me for 30 minutes for following the flag code. The district manager and I walk into the security shack and sit down with my boss. The district manager proceeded to tell my boss that he's being fired for harassment and for violating his own flag code policy. I ultimately left a week later because I found a better job elsewhere, but it was one of the most satisfying things I've ever experienced. It sounds in this case like the DM was already up to here with this person, and this was just the reason to let them go, finally. OP does mention down in the comments that the atmosphere got incredibly better once that guy was fired. Our last story today comes to us from Curry Pan. Brown Noser doesn't like me or my role. Let's jump right in. I saw a similar post about a brown noser who loves to police other people's time, and it reminded me of my story. So a few years back, I worked in a lab in a small employee-owned metal plating shop. Now, this was my first time in an employee-owned shop, and I was not prepared for the pettiness that I had to endure for 6 months before I quit and found a better position. A little background for those of you who have no experience in a lab. When running samples, time just goes by. Some samples take 10 minutes and others take upwards to an hour. Now, this shop had very strict hours for breaks and lunch. There was even a bell like a darn school. Anyway, I was not restricted to these bells because, like I said, sample time varies, and my role was to make sure manufacturing doesn't stop because of issues. Also, important note, I was the only qualified chemist on site of about 100 people. Yeah, I also overhauled their entire quality system to pass audits, but lunch is what they focus on. So onto the story. One day manufacturing was just crap. I'm one person testing 6 tanks because the solution wasn't plating. From 5 a.m. to 3 p.m. I was troubleshooting by myself because, like I said, I'm the only chemist, so I didn't eat lunch. Anyway, at around 3:30 p.m., things quiet down and I eat my first meal of the day. Then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I see someone taking my picture. Shake my head. Of course, I get an earful from management saying I have to take lunch when the bell rings. Onto the malicious compliance. Anytime I got a sample in around 10 to 11 a.m., I strictly measured the time it would have taken me to finish said test. I would also do it very slowly and carefully. If I got a sample in at 11:30 a.m., I would tell my boss, "Sorry, this takes me an hour to do and lunch is in 30 minutes. I'll do it after my lunch break." After a few days of this, manufacturing became crap. I just waited until after lunch. Guess who got permission to eat lunch whenever I wanted? I quit soon after with a job that paid $10K more a year, with full benefits and a newly renovated lab. When everything is running well and has been running well for a very long time, I think people don't understand just how much of an impact quality has on that whole process. Until they're gone, of course, and I think that goes for many other departments as well. Don't forget to check out the KCC Discord linked at the top of the description down below. Check out all 5 OPs linked in the description down below as well. I thank you for watching, hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.